Chapter 3 The Subject and Enjoyment. Conforming to the meaning of the word process, recording falls back on se rabat sur production, but the production of recording itself is produced by the production of production. Similarly, recording is followed by consumption, but the production of consumption is produced in and through the production of recording. This is because something on the order of a subject can be discerned on the recording surface. It is a strange subject, however, with no fixed identity, wandering about over the body without organs, but always remaining peripheral to the desiring machines, being defined by the share of the product it takes for itself, garnering here, there, and everywhere a reward in the form of a becoming or an avatar, being born of the states that it consumes and being reborn with each new state. It's me, and so it's mine. Even suffering, as Marx says, is a form of self-enjoyment. Doubtless all desiring production is, in and of itself, immediately consumption and consummation, and therefore sensual pleasure, but this is not yet the case for a subject that can situate itself only in terms of the disjunctions of a recording surface in what is left after each division. Returning yet again to the case of Judge Schreber, we note that he is vividly aware of this fact. The rate of cosmic sexual pleasure remains constant, so that God will find a way of taking his pleasure with Schreber, even if in order to do so, Schreber must transform himself into a woman. But Schreber experiences only a residual share of this pleasure as a recompense for his suffering or as a reward for his becoming woman. On the other hand, God demands a constant state of enjoyment, and it is my duty to provide him with this in the shape of the greatest possible output of spiritual voluptuousness, and if, in this process, a little sensual pleasure falls to my share, I feel justified in accepting it as some slight compensation for the inordinate measure of suffering and privation that has been mine for so many past years. Just as part of the libido as energy of production was transformed into energy of recording, Newman, a part of this energy of recording is transformed into energy of consummation, voluptuous. It is this residual energy that is the motive force behind the third synthesis of the subconscious, the conjunctive synthesis. So it's, or the production of consumption. We must examine how this synthesis is formed, or how the subject is produced. Our point of departure was the opposition between desiring machines and the body without organs. The repulsion of these machines, as found in the paranoiac machine, or primary repression, gave way to an attraction in the miraculating machine. But the opposition between attraction and repulsion persists. It would seem that a genuine reconciliation of the two can take place only on the level of a new machine functioning as the return of the repressed. There was a number of proofs that such a reconciliation does or can exist. With no further details being provided, we are told of Robert Guy, the very talented designer of paranoiac electrical machines. Quote, since he was unable to free himself of these currents that were tormenting him, he gave every appearance of having finally joined forces with them, taking passionate pride in portraying them in their total victory and their triumph. End quote. Freud is more specific when he stresses the crucial turning point that occurs in Schreber's illness, when Schreber becomes reconciled to becoming woman and embarks upon a process of self-cure that brings him back to the equation nature equals production, the production of a new humanity. As a matter of fact, Schreber finds himself frozen in the pose and trapped in the paraphernalia of a transvestite at a moment when he is practically cured and has recovered all his faculties. Quote, I am sometimes to be found standing before the mirror or elsewhere, with the upper portion of my body partially bared and wearing sundry feminine adornments such as ribbons, trumpery necklaces, and the like. This occurs only, I may add, when I am by myself, and never, at least so far as I am able to avoid it, in the presence of other people. Let us borrow the term celibate machine to designate this machine that succeeds the paranoiac machine and the miraculating machine, forming a new alliance between the desiring machines and the body without organs, so as to give birth to a new humanity or a glorious organism. This is the tantamount to saying that the subject is produced as a mere residuum alongside the desiring machines, or that he confuses himself with this third productive machine, and with the residual reconciliation that it brings about, a conjunctive synthesis, or consumption in the form of a word, of a wonderstruck. So that's what that was. Michael Karagus has identified a certain number of fantastic machines, celibate machines that he has discovered in works of literature. The examples he points to are many very different sorts, and at first glance do not seem to belong to a single category. Marcel Duchamp's painting Le Marimas nos pères célibataires même, parentheses, the bride stripped bare by her bachelors even. The machine in Kafka's In the Penal Colony, Raymond Rousseau's machines, those of Jerry's Sur Mal, certain of Edgar Allan Poe's machines, Wheeler's Eve Future, etc. The characteristics that allow us to clarify all of them in this one category, though their importance varies according to the examples considered, are as follows. The celibate machine, first of all, reveals the existence of a much older paranoiac machine, with its tortures, its dark shadows, its ancient law. The celibate machine itself is not a paranoiac machine, however. Everything about it is different, its cogs, its sliding carriage, its shears, needles, magnets, rays. Even when it tortures or kills, it manifests something new and different, a solar force. In the second place, this transfiguration cannot be explained by the miraculating powers the machine possesses due to the inscription hidden inside it, though it in fact contains within itself the most impressive sort of inscription. Cf. the recording supplied by Edison for E Future. A genuine consummation is achieved by the new machine, a pleasure that can rightly be called autoerotic, or rather automatic, the nuptial celebration of a new alliance, a new birth, a radiant ecstasy, as though the eroticism of the machine liberated other unlimited forces. The question becomes, what does the celibate machine produce? What is produced by means of it? The answer would seem to be intensive quantities. There is a schizophrenic experience of intensive quantities in their pure state, to a point that is almost unbearable, a celibate misery and glory experienced to the fullest, like a cry suspended between life and death, an intense feeling of transition, states of pure, naked intensity stripped of all shapes and form. These are often described as hallucinations and delirium, but the basic phenomenon of hallucination I see, I hear, and the basic phenomenon of delirium, I think, presuppose and I feel at an even deeper level, which gives hallucinations their object, and the basic phenomenon of delirium, and delirium its content, and I feel that I am becoming woman, that I am becoming God, and so on, which is neither delirious nor hallucinatory, but will project the hallucination or internalize the delirium. Delirium and hallucination are secondary in relation to the really primary emotion, which in the beginning only experiences intensities, becomings, transitions. Where do these pure intensities come from? They come from the two preceding forces, repulsion and attraction, and from the opposition of these two forces. It must not be thought that the intensities themselves are in opposition to one another, arriving at a state of balance around a neutral state. On the contrary, They're all positive in relation to the zero intensity that designates the full body without organs, and they undergo relative rises or falls depending on the complex relationship between them and the variations in the relative strength of attraction and repulsion as determining factors. In a word, the opposition of the forces of attraction and repulsion produces an open series of intensive elements, all of them positive, that are never an expression of the final equilibrium of a system, but consist rather of an unlimited number of stationary, metastable states through which a subject passes. The Kantian theory, according to which intensive quantities fill up to varying degrees matter that has no empty spaces, is profoundly schizoid. Further, if we are to believe Judge Schreber's doctrine, attraction and repulsion produce intense nervous states that fill up the body without organs to varying degrees. States through which Schreber the subject passes, becoming a woman, and many other things as well, following an endless circle of eternal return. The breasts on the judge's naked torso are neither delirious nor hallucinatory phenomena. They designate, first of all, a band of intensity, a zone of intensity on his body without organs. The body without organs is an egg. It is a crisscross with axes and thresholds, with latitudes and longitudes and geodesic lines, traversed by gradients marking the transitions and the becomings, the destinations of the subject developing along these particular vectors. Nothing here is representative. Rather, it is all life and lived experience. The actual lived emotion of having breasts does not resemble breasts. It does not represent them, any more than a predestined zone in the egg resembles the organ that it is going to be stimulated to produce within itself. Nothing but bands of intensity, potentials, thresholds, and gradients. A harrowing, emotionally overwhelming experience which brings the schizo as close as possible to matter, to a burning, living center of matter. This emotion situated outside of the particular point where the mind is searching for it. One's entire soul flows into this emotion that makes the mind aware of the terribly disturbing sound of matter and passes through its white-hot flame. How is it possible that the schizo was conceived of as the autistic rag, separated from the real and cut off from life, that he is so often thought to be? Worse still, how can psychiatric practice have made him this sort of rag? How can it have reduced him to this state of a body without organs? That has become a dead thing, this schizo who sought to remain at that unbearable point where the mind touches matter and lives its every intensity, consumes it. And shouldn't this question immediately compel us to raise another one, which at first glance seems quite different? How does psychoanalysis go about reducing a person who, this time is not schizophrenic but a neurotic, to a pitiful creature who eternally consumes daddy and mommy and nothing else whatsoever? How could the conjunctive synthesis of, so that's what it was, and so it's me, have been reduced to the endless dreary discovery of Oedipus? So it's my father, my mother. We cannot answer these two questions at this point. We merely see how very little the consumption of pure intensities has to do with family figures, and how very different the connective tissue of so it's is from the eatable tissue. How can we sum up this entire vital progression? Let us trace it along a first path, the shortest route. The point of disjunction on the body without organs forms circles that converge on the desiring machines. Then the subject produced as a residuum alongside the machine as an appendix, or as a spare part adjacent to the machine, passes through all the degrees of the circle and passes from one circle to another. This subject itself is not at the center, which is occupied by the machine, but on the periphery, which no fixed identity forever center defined by the states through which it passes. Thus the circle traced by Beckett's unnailable, quote, a succession of irregular loops, now sharp and short as in the waltz, now the parabolic sweep. With Murphy, Watt, Mercier, etc., as states without the family having anything whatsoever to do with all of this, or to follow a path that is more complex but leads in the end to the same thing by means of the paranoic machine and the miraculating machine, the production of attraction and repulsion on the body without organs, producing, starting from zero, a series of states in the celibate machine, and the subject is born of each state in the series, is continually reborn of the following state that determines him at a given moment, consummating all these states. What can that cause him to be born and reborn? The lived state coming first in relation to the subject that lives it. This is what Klosowski has admirably demonstrated in his commentary on Nietzsche. The presence of the Stimmung as a material emotion constitutive of the most lofty thought and the most acute perception. The centrifugal forces do not flee the center forever, but approach it once again only to retreat from it yet again. Such is the nature of the violent oscillations that overwhelm an individual so long as he seeks only his own center and is incapable of seeing the circle of which he himself is a part. For if these oscillations overwhelm him, it is because each one of them corresponds to an individual other than the one he believes himself to be, from the point of view of the unlocatable center. As a result, an identity is essentially fortuitous, and a series of individualities must be undergone by each of these oscillations, so that as a consequence the fortuitousness of this or that particular individuality will render all of them necessary. The forces of attraction and repulsion, of soaring, ascents, and plunging falls produce a series of intensive states based on the intensity equals zero that designates the body without organs. Quote, but what is most unusual is that here, again, a new afflux is necessary, merely to signify this absence. End quote. There is no Nietzsche, the self professor of philology, who suddenly loses his mind and supposedly identifies with all sorts of strange people. Rather, there is the Nietzschean subject, who passes through a series of states, and who identifies these states with the names of history. Every name in history is I. The subject spreads itself out along the entire circumference of the circle, the center of which has been abandoned by the ego. At the center is the desiring machine, the celibate machine of the eternal return, a residual subject of the machine. Nietzsche as subject garners a euphoric reward, voluptas, from everything that this machine turns out, a product that the reader has thought to be no more than the fragmented oeuvre by Nietzsche. Quote, Nietzsche believes that he is now pursuing not the realization of a system, but the application of a program in the form of residues of the Nietzschean discourse, which have now become the repertoire, so to speak, of his historicism. End quote. It's not a matter of identifying with various historical personages, but rather identifying the names of history with zones of intensity on the body without organs. And each time Nietzsche as subject exclaims, they're me, so it's me. No one has ever been as deeply involved in history as the schizo, or dealt with it in this way. He consumes all of universal history in one fell swoop. We began by defining him as homo natura, and lo and behold, he has turned out to be homo histora. This long road that leads from the one to the other stretches from Hölderlin to Nietzsche, and the pace becomes faster and faster. Quote, the euphoria could not be prolonged in Nietzsche. The vision of the world granted by Nietzsche does not inaugurate a more or less regular succession of landscapes or still lifes extending over a period of 40 years or so. It is rather a parody of the process of recollection of an event. A single actor will play the whole of it in pantomime in the course of a single solemn day. because the whole of it reaches expression and then disappears once again in the space of just one day, even though it may appear to have taken place between December 31st and January 6th, in a realm above and beyond the usual rational calendar." End quote.